Uh-oh. Here we go again. The Switch's eShop is starting to turn into the Wild West in terms of random games being thrown on it. The barrier of entry is obviously pretty low because it's starting to remind me a lot of Steam, if I'm being honest. Plenty of games that I've never heard of are available on there for one measly Washington or less, and last summer I took a look at a bunch of them, but back then I barely scratched the surface. But alas, the eShop is constantly updating, so let's dive back in and see what I managed to find this time. Before we get into the video though, I want to take a minute to talk about today's sponsor, Boxu. Boxu is a monthly subscription box that delivers a whole bunch of different Japanese snacks right to your door. Starting at just $24, each month you'll receive a box full of authentic Japanese goodies, each month featuring a new theme and different snacks. My first box is called Seasons of Japan and came with a bunch of snacks whose flavors pair with each of the 4 seasons, and it comes with a little booklet which not only explains the reasoning behind all these pairings, but also has a ton of reading material on each included snack. My personal favorite is the matcha chocolate stick cake because I have a hard time passing up anything with matcha in it. Boxu subscriptions include free shipping and tracking to over 40 countries directly from Japan. So if this seems up your alley and you want to check out Boxu's delicious authentic Japanese snack offerings and also help support my channel, you can use my 10% discount code and link in the description and save up to $44 on your order. Now, let's get into the video. Alright, so first up, we have a game called Mad Age and This Guy. The story takes place in the age of Steam, a time where technology started booming. Unfortunately though, not all inventors and scientists are good, and a bunch of mad scientists want to use modern technology to take over the world. Our job, as this guy, a secret agent, is to track down and punish the mad scientists. So this is a sort of puzzle game with maze-like elements and things to collect before reaching each exit, but the series I'd mostly compare it to is Bomberman. There are mechanics all over this game ripped straight from Bomberman, and they actually work pretty well. It's basically Bomberman if instead of a square room, you're thrown into a linear level with an end goal. Sure, there's some deviation and it's not always a straight shot, but there's a defined beginning and end to each level. Now, despite being pretty much just like Bomberman, the controls aren't as tight. Not that I'd expect them to be, but they don't seem as quick and responsive as I'd like them to be. Sometimes I think I'm evading the overly quick-moving enemies, and just as I think I'm safe, I die from a hitbox I wasn't expecting to collide with. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend I was super engaged, and about halfway through the first world, it was starting to get old and just a little frustrating, but honestly, for a game played in small bursts, you could do a lot worse than this. I paid literally 5 cents for this, so I can't really complain. This isn't the kind of game you're gonna want to sit down for hours and sink your teeth into, but when you have a few minutes to kill, this is definitely a competent game to pick up and play for at least a few stages. I've never been more bored out of my mind playing a racing game as I was playing VSR Void Space Racing. Now, originally, upon first downloading the game, the screenshots looked a little promising. I figured it would just be like a Wipeout clone or an F-Zero type of game that takes place in space, but what I actually got was a slippery, slow-feeling flight game where my only objective was to make it through hoop-shaped checkpoints. It's less like an actual racing game and more like a timed minigame where you fly through hoops. There's no friction at all, so braking is totally necessary, though that doesn't make any sense, or else you won't be able to maneuver properly. There is a drift, but as far as I can tell, it's basically useless and you pretty much just need to utilize the brake. Getting first place in races opens up new courses, but the courses themselves are nothing more than different set pieces and scenery, since there isn't really actually any track to speak of. You're just flying around space itself, and the only course you're set on is whatever order the checkpoints come in, which is designated by the arrows on screen. The red one points to the current checkpoint, and the blue one corresponds to whatever the following checkpoint is, which I will admit is a helpful addition so I don't go too fast in one direction if the next checkpoint is in the complete opposite direction that I'm flying in. I unlocked and beat all the stages, but all that's left to do is harder difficulties and time trials. There's no story mode, no Grand Prix, and no credits sequence. This is absolutely not worth the 10 cents that I paid for it. Don't buy this. Save your change and go to a Coinstar or something. Here we have a super basic 2D platformer that probably could have just been made in Flash, but instead was developed for the Switch. Now, there's been plenty of really basic 2D platformers that resemble this one that have come out over the years, some actually created in Flash and then went on to become fully fledged games. This one, however, seems like it never made it past that first try concept stage and instead went straight to being a console title. Cosmo Nada is a 2D platformer where the goal is to simply get to the exit while avoiding hazards. The controls are pretty slippery, but after some getting used to, they're at least serviceable. And luckily, when you die, you typically don't respawn at the start of the stage, and instead respawn right before the challenge you happen to die on, despite the stages not being very long in the first place. I do at least have to give the game credit for being relatively forgiving. This isn't balls to the walls hard, but it's no cakewalk either. The difficulty is actually pretty much completely middle of the road, and out of the 40 or so stages I played, there actually is a pretty good difficulty curve as you get into the later stages. Unfortunately, those 40 levels that I played are 40 out of 60, and even 2/3 into the game, the color palette and stage assets never never change, nor does the game introduce many new hazards you haven't already seen in the first 10 stages. Also, despite the title screen having a short theme song, there's absolutely no soundtrack to speak of, so you're essentially playing in silence the entire time, save for a few quick sound effects here and there, and even that rarely happens. This isn't terrible, and for 99 cents I can't really complain too much. I had a little bit of fun, and I think that's all I can really ask for. Theater Tales is a simple storybook app for kids, but honestly, if I was a kid, I would be furious about this one. So basically what you have is a dialogue-less take on fairy tales, the first one that's accessible being Little Red Riding Hood. Right off the bat, I thought maybe the game didn't work with the Pro Controller, and then I realized that you actually control the character with the right thumbstick, and then the game also uses the A button as the action button, both inputs being on the right side of the controller. Why? So you walk around basically just tapping A whenever something on the screen moves to progress the story, and what plays out is a very family-friendly version of the Little Red Riding Hood story. No human consumption, no weapons, and no speech at all, but the story is simple enough and the game gives you enough context to not really need it. Now this would all be fine for just a simple little kids game. It's easy with little to no gameplay besides a couple very easy minigames, but my main issue with this is that when starting the game, Little Red Riding Hood is selectable, but all the other stories are locked. This would be fine, except for the fact that there's literally no way to unlock them. I checked. So the game taunts you with stories that you can't even play through, and I guarantee any kid would be let down by this, and then an unsuspecting adult, who also doesn't understand, will need to try to explain that to their kid, why they can't play the stuff that's supposed to be in the game. Apparently, the other stories are supposed to be DLC, but the game originally came out on Apple TV back in 2016, and then was ported to the Switch in 2019. Considering it came out like 4 years ago, something tells me we won't be getting that DLC anytime soon. This might just be one of the most infuriating games I've ever played in my entire life. Nikki the Home Alone golf ball on the surface looks like a very peaceful game. Very subtle piano music, visuals that remind me of something like Unravel, but don't mistake this game for something relaxing, it very much is not. The object of the game is to traverse the world by using what are essentially Angry Birds controls. You can alter the strength and trajectory in which you'll send Nikki flying, but for the most part, anything other than full strength is pretty much useless in most applications. The physics in this game are absolute garbage. This is one of the most frustrating games I've ever played. Stuff just doesn't work. A lot of times you need to make a bunch of maneuvers you know are wrong just to get into the right position to make the correct one. A lot of situations in this game are similar to a game like Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, where one wrong move sends you all the way to the bottom of whatever challenge you're on, with a chance you'll be able to recover without losing too much progress, but you're more likely to have to redo the entire thing. I've never played a game before that got me so frustrated that I legitimately felt like I was going to throw up. So this game is breaking ground here, and I felt this way roughly 5 minutes into my playthrough. Eventually, I got to this part where you need to gradually ascend and reach each of these moving platforms, and one wrong move sends you all the way back down to the bottom. It got to the point where I thought I was about to reach the top, and then once again, I found myself plummeting back to the bottom. For my own sanity, I promptly stopped playing and deleted the game from my Switch. Ever wanted to fix a bus? Well, now you can in Bus Fix 2019. So next time someone tries to tell you what to do, you say to them, "Hey, go fix a bus." This is an absolute nightmare to play with a controller. It's very obvious that this game was intended to be played with a touchscreen, since every second the game gets during the initial tutorial tries to convince you to use touchscreen controls. The game can be played with the controller though, but if you don't pay extremely close attention and memorize every action that the buttons do during the tutorial, you're going to be completely lost, as there's nothing in the HUD telling you what any of the buttons do. So the object, as I'm sure you can assume, is to fix a bus. Various customers come into the shop needing their buses fixed, and various jobs are lined up with specific things that the customer says are wrong with the vehicle. Then you proceed to diagnose and fix these issues. However, with a controller, this is easier said than done, as it never seems to do what I want it to do. Really, this game doesn't take much brain power, and it's pretty much just a matter of looking at various parts of the bus, I keep saying various, looking for stuff that's broken, which is indicated by the part being red, and then subsequently fixing or replacing said part. Problem is, when using a controller, sometimes stuff just doesn't work. I swear I soft-locked myself out of fixing this part because I had removed so many parts, and the game wouldn't let me select the one that was broken. It got to the point where I knew for a fact something was wrong because I'd rotate the analog stick and it would randomly select the broken part for just a second before highlighting a different one. I even tried rotating it slowly to get it in some kind of sweet spot where the game would let me select the right part, and it just would not work. Maybe this game is more enjoyable with the touchscreen, but with a controller, this crap's broken. But hey, if you want to pick your Switch up out of the dock and use the touchscreen, what are you waiting for? Go fix a bus. If I had to come up with the most middle-of-the-road, cheap, unremarkable, but inoffensive platformer I could think of, I'd probably come up with something like Avenger Bird. So this bird goes off to get food for her babies, and then they're stolen by this other mean-looking bird, and you know he's gotta be one rough tumbler because he's wearing an eye patch. It's one of those 2D platformers that I'd consider something like a collectathon of sorts. Run through stages, collecting X amount of a specific item, which activates the door, leading you to complete the stage. I will say this game does the one thing that drives me crazy about any 2D platformer, and that's not allowing me to use the D-pad and forcing me to use the analog stick to move. And I'll tell you right now, it's not doing this game any favors. The controls are supposed to be simple, but it took a while for me to really work out the kinks of the physics, because they're honestly pretty weird. So besides normal directional movement, you can flap your wings to ascend, and you can glide. These are your main means of traversal. Both of these mechanics have a stamina meter, and when you run out, you fall. The main weird issue I had with these physics is that in pretty much any other platformer with mechanics like these, you'd think, okay, so I need to not immediately tap the button a bunch to conserve stamina, but that isn't the case. If you don't immediately rapidly tap the button, you can't ascend as high, and it's something that took me a few minutes to figure out. It's really weird and goes against every, platformer instinct in my brain. Honestly, what you see here is what you get. You go around collecting these little rings and avoiding enemies. This is one of those games that's just kind of there and doesn't really have anything noteworthy to praise or criticize. Then again, I feel like that can be said for pretty much anything you can purchase for 23 cents. And with that, I'm all out of games for today. This is now the second time I've done this, and honestly, I don't see the well of cheap stuff on the eShop drying out anytime soon, so I'm sure this is a topic I'll end up revisiting from time to time. As for the time being, I'm gonna go stress vomit from playing that golf ball game. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it and want to see more, there's a couple other videos right there you can check out. And if you want to see everything I upload, subscribe and then tap the bell icon. And if you want to help support the channel, I have a Patreon right there too.